Here's a view across Georgia Straits to the mainland from the Forbidden Plateau, the old ski hill, which is the first thing you have to climb up and over to get into the Forbidden Plateau region. It's a bit of a climb getting up and over the ski hill. Nothing too serious. The ski hill actually closed down in 1999. But it makes for some interesting hiking trails. There's always a number of choices on which trails to take. After you get over the ski hill, you actually enter the Forbidden Plateau, which is reasonably flat trails with a number of lakes and small ponds all along the way. You can normally hear the frogs unless you disturb them, and they all go silent as soon as you try and take a video of them. The trails are pretty reasonable here. You can actually see some of the old construction from the original ski lifts. Some of the concrete footings are still in place. Got quite an early start, but just after 6 o'clock from the trailhead, which basically beats the morning heat. But here you can see the mist rising up off the water. And here you can see the trail actually enters the Strathcona Park at this point as you leave the ski hill behind. So there's a great entry sign for the park. It has a map of a lot of the trails in this region. There are actually trails that turn off from here and head over to Paradise Meadows, which is right near the new Mount Washington ski hill. So we're headed for Mount Becher along this trail. Some nice ponds along the way. As you get closer to Mount Becher, the trail starts to get a little bit steeper. So it starts to gain some elevation. This is where the trail splits off. It'll take you over to Paradise Meadows and all the trails that are available there. Don't be a litterbug. Love these old signs. So another 2 kilometers to Mount Becher. Trail starts getting a little narrower and a little bit more overgrown. This is my first wildlife. There's a little chick. It's a grouse chick. But then I found the mother, who was desperate to protect her chicks. She tried to scare me off. Luckily, she didn't run into me. So I moved on as quickly as possible so as not to disturb her too much. She was quite upset. She basically flew up into my face and tried to scare me off. So here we are, starting to climb up the side of Mount Becher. So the trail starts getting even steeper. Start gaining a bit more altitude. Can still see the mainland from here. And the trail gets a lot rockier. So it continues upwards. There's a campsite with a couple of fire pits built in the 1930s. Bit of a historic piece of work. Nice campsite with a water source. And from here the trail continues upward. It does at one point cross a small creek, which may or may not be full of water. After this creek crossing, you'll actually climb into a set of cliffs. There's just a slot in the rocks that you can climb up with the assistance of a rope, which is greatly appreciated. Just makes it a little easier to get up over this steep section. It's not a very long section, but it does give you a little bit of a workout. It comes in 2 parts. One has a rope. The second part doesn't have a rope. Looking back down. So you have to free climb this next section. but it's not terribly exposed, so just have to find your footing. So that's the crack you have to climb. Not too bad. And from here, it's just following the trail up and over some exposed rock. Nothing more serious along this part. But you do start getting your first views of the mountains in the Strathcona Park area. Not too hard to find the trail. It's a few ponds up on the towards the summit. This is the final section of trail that actually leads out onto the summit. Nice reflecting ponds. Little time lapse here to speed up the final section. I don't actually move that fast on the trail. And here we are, actually coming out on the official summit point. There's actually some survey markers embedded in the rock. There's the rest of Strathcona Park, still snow-capped. Looking towards Comox Lake down there, and then looking back towards Comox. It's one of the glaciers on top of mountains nearby. This is panorama from standing on the summit. And that's the full view from summit of Becher mountain. Rather than going back down the way I came, I headed out along the ridge line leading off of Becher mountain, which actually has a rather steep descent in a bit of a dip in the ridge, which drops down quite steeply and then climbs back up quite steeply. Here's me looking for the trail. It's not always obvious. It's a little less used trail, so you really got to keep your eyes open. You can only see it down in the grass. As soon as you cross a rocky section, it becomes a little harder to find. I didn't get too lost. There. Now you can see the trail. Some great viewpoints along the way. Somewhat better view of Comox Lake. Looking up further into Strathcona Park. This is part of the steep descent along the ridge. Takes a little bit of scrambling to get over some of these logs and such. And then I had to traverse across a very narrow ledge across this open rock, which actually led to a section of rope, which is very handy considering how steep it was. There are 2 or 3 sections like this. Some had ropes, unfortunately some did not. You just have to be careful about your footing. This one led to a nice lookout point. Another look at Comox Lake. Of course, after climbing down that ridge, had to climb back up the next ridge to keep on the ridge line. Some of the flowers along the way. Actually caught a bee on this particular flower. Coming down off the ridge, you end up back in some of the old logging areas. This would have been an old overgrown logging road, actually, which ultimately popped out onto basically an old logging road that's still being used by 4x4s and other such things. So this trail ends up linked to a number of logging roads, but it eventually comes out into a clear cut, which is quite a difference when you come out of a forest and into a clear cut. There's no current logging activity in this area, but you can still see the remains of the stuff from the last century. Back into the woods, and then out across an old riverbed. The only way across it, well, the original route across it goes through this log jam, which is actually, it's a pile of logs that are about 10 feet deep. So if you fell down through between the logs, you'd end up a long way down. So I chose not to go over these logs, which is the original route. But I was able to find an alternate route by going back up a few feet and crossing up onto the far bank and got back onto the trail. This is the trail section directly above the creek bed that I crossed. And here's the original section that they'd attach some ropes to get you up the banking up from the creek, which is a route I chose not to go. But I did finally get back on track. And from here, it was just simple trails back to the car. That was my day.